Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this meeting of Babergh District Council Cabinet. I am Councillor John Ward, leader of Babergh District Council, and I'll be chairing this meeting. May I remind you of some domestic arrangements. Please ensure that microphones are turned off when not in use. Please do not interrupt other speakers or hold separate conversations whilst others are speaking. If you are attending the meeting to speak and persistently interrupt the meeting, you may be asked to leave. Please ensure your mobile phones are on silent or switched off. And finally, we will be using e-voting for this meeting on the modern.gov app, so please could members make sure that they are logged in and ready to use the app. I would like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing. The whole of the meeting will be filmed except where there are confidential or exempt items. If you make a representation to the meeting, you'll be deemed by the Council to have consented to being filmed. By entering this meeting as a speaker, you are also consenting to being recorded by the Council and to the possible use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting and or training purposes. The Council, members of the public and the press may record, film, photograph or broadcast this meeting when the public and the press are not lawfully excluded. I'll now move to the agenda. Item 1, apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. We have received apologies from Councillor Jane Gould.
Thank you. Item 2, to receive declarations of pecuniary, other registrable or non-registrable interest by members. Are there any? No. Thank you. Item 3, paper BCA 2238, to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on 9th of January 2023, and you'll find the meeting minutes on pages 5 to 13 of the agenda pack. I'll just go through these and please let me know if there are any points you wish to make. Page 5. Page 6. Yep. Councillor Busby.
83.5, just for clarity, apparently I queried whether other working adults were expected to contribute. I think it ought to be other working adults in the same household.
Thank you. Page 7. Page 8. Page 9. Page 10. Page 11, page 12, and finally page 13. So if there are no other points to raise, may I have a proposer, please? Councillor McLaren, and a seconder? Councillor Malvisi. And we'll now go to the vote, please.
Thank you, Chair. That vote is now in progress. Councillor McCraw? May I take your vote?
My name is log on
In favour. Thank you very much, Councillor McCraw.
no.
Thank you, Chair. That's 7 votes for. That's unanimous.
Thank you. Item 4, to receive notification of petitions in accordance with the Council's petition scheme.
None received.
Item 5, questions by councillors.
None received, Chair.
Thank you. And item 6, matters referred by the Overview and Scrutiny or Joint Audit and Standards Committees.
There are no matters referred from the Joint for the Joint Audit and Scrutiny Committee or the Joint Audit Standards
Thank you.
Committee.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Item 7, forthcoming decisions lists. Members of the Cabinet, does anyone have any comments on the forthcoming decisions list? No. Okay then, we'll move on to the next item, item 8, paper BCA 2239, the General Fund Budget for 2023 to 24 and 4-year outlook. I'll now invite the Cabinet Member for Finance, Assets and Investments to introduce this report. Councillor Busby.
Okay, we've been through this a few times, so I'll try a different approach this afternoon. I've been in finance for 50 years. I started with Ford Motor Company on £1,604 per year. Many of you will be earning more than that per week. I've never experienced such a crazy budgeting scenario that faces us today. Net service expenditure is up 19%, 2.4 million, and interest charge is up from 0 to 4%, another 1.2 million. To fund this, the government restricts our grants increase to less than 6% and only allows an increase in council taxes of under 3%. it is no wonder that we were looking at a shortfall of £2 million. But at the 11th hour, the government announces that it will fund us for the potential loss of £1 million on business rates. And we managed to find, through savings and the use of reserves, the balance. However, whilst I can present a balanced budget for you today, we are still facing considerable financial challenges going forward. It may seem strange to some that two councils who share the same staff, the same building, and largely the same objectives and policies can have such wildly different financial positions. The main answer is extra £6.6 million of new homes bonus for Mid-Suffolk. Over the 12 years it has been operating, Mid-Suffolk has received £18.4 million compared to Babergh's £11.8. Is it right that a council's finances are governed by developers and the speed that they want to build out? Something needs to change, but in the meantime I move the recommendation in 3 and ask for a seconder.
Thank you, Councillor Busby. That was a very interesting introduction, and I have to say I couldn't disagree with any of that. May I have a seconder, please? Councillor McCraw. Right. Members of the Cabinet, do you have any questions on the budget? Councillor McLaren.
Thank you, Chair. When we have a problem, we call in experts, as we do not have the required skills in-house, and we also pay for external services on a regular basis. Do we have the details of these payments itemised in the budget? So that's two parts. One is the short term, and the other is the sort of like the auditors are external contracts, aren't they?
Well, we have the individual amounts, yes, but they're not broken out in this budget.
No. Is that possible to... I'd be interested to see those figures if they're available.
I'm looking at my experts that are in-house.
I couldn't quite hear Councillor McLaren, but if you...
I'm really sorry.
That's all right now.
It is difficult, Councillor Busby sitting behind me. I was on about the different extra staff hours that we have external contractors that are routine, like auditors, that we pay for. But we also, when we have a problem, we often call in experts. And I just wondered if we had some details of that expenditure. I did look for it, but I couldn't find it.
Yeah, we don't put that level of detail in here or even in the budget book, to be fair, but I'm happy to share that with you outside of the meeting.
Especially the ones where experts are called in, where we have a problem.
Yeah, we do monitor that ourselves at SLT as well, so I'm happy to share that with you.
Thanks, Melissa. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry. Any other questions from members of the Cabinet? Councillor McLaren.
At what point are we going to see the benefit of the solar panels in Kingfisher Leisure Centre, sorry? Because there is a benefit to Abbeycroft Leisure, but will we get some report on that?
I'm not certain whether we'll get something on the individual amount, but when we're getting the benefits already, helping to keep the cost of electricity down. I'm sure we can ask Abbeycroft for details of that.
Just as Cabinet member, that it's actually paying dividends. Thank you. Thank you,
Perhaps
Chair.
we should be asking you that question then.
Yeah, well, I don't know it yet. Thank you.
Councillor Malvisi.
Chair. Kingfisher it's a bit like a recipe. It's got grid electricity, it's got solar panels on its own roof, it's got solar panels on the solar carports, which are primarily there to provide electric vehicle charging points. The surplus goes into a battery store, like the solar panels on the roof, and they power up the leisure centre. We've reduced the cost of, we've aimed at reducing the cost of the overall energy bill by installing the filtration system on the swimming pool, which means that the water's heated to a certain level. It's then put through a filtration system, and it doesn't lose much of its heat in that process. So all these elements have not had a chance to function for a 12-month period to give us the necessary data to be able to move forward on the next step. But the electricity that Kingfisher uses, we moved them to a green energy tariff, which is one of the lowest.
I think that's helpful because actually those are the sort of questions the public ask.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor McCraw.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to ask the Cabinet member for something he referred to obliquely in his introduction, which is actually at the forefront of my mind, which is the projected deficits in forthcoming years. And I wonder if he can provide any information for residents, voters, customers, on how we might be able to deal with those projected deficits and of course, and how big that shortfall might be.
Well, I think the paper shows how that deficit builds up over the next 2 or 3 years. At this stage, we haven't got specific plans to deal with that. That will be one of our first challenges in the new financial year. And as I mentioned in my report introduction, it's very difficult to do these budgets because most of the important information the government won't give us until the last minute of the year.
Like every year. There's a huge amount of uncertainty. Thanks.
Any other questions? In which case, before we go to debate, I'll ask other members present if they have any questions, starting with the Chair of Overview and Scrutiny. Do you have any questions?
Just a quick one, Mr. Chairman. I was just looking at page 22 of the report, which shows PV panels giving an income of 370,000. That is presumably the ones on the houses rather than the ones on the solar panels. But I'm not sure how many panels there are on the Kingfisher Leisure, etc. And it also depends a little bit on which way they point, and whether they're going to get shaded, etc. But there is considerable income coming from those other solar panels. Added to which, of course, that is the income, but of course the householders get to use the electricity as well. So there's a reduction in their individual bills. So the actual amount earned is probably considerably more.
Thank you. And Councillor Barrett, Simon Barrett and then Melanie Barrett. Yours went up first.
Oh, did it?
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Just a question. On the brought forward balance in the general fund of 527,000, which was brought forward, how does that square with the outturn of 1.4 million? Where has the difference gone?
Councillor Busby.
I think the 520,000 that you're referring to was the projected surplus in the budget. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, basically, if you look at the, you've got 524 as a brought forward. So in your columns where you've got your pressures and your other bits, you've got your 525 as a brought forward balance. Okay, so that's obviously a figure that came forward. But the outturn statement that we had last year was 1.4 million. Now, presumably, well, it was, John, it was 1.4 million outturn.
That was the outturn for 21-22.
22.
22-23 outturn will come in the summer.
So 21-22, right, 22. So you've got that as your outturn statement for that, which was obviously come forward. That would then indicate that so the position that we're in now, so are you saying that that hasn't come forward again, or was that all absorbed within the reserve budgets that it was allocated to within the last year 2022-23?
Thank you, Chair. So of the 1.4 million, £500,000 of that we put into the inflationary pressures reserve. So that's gone into this current year's reserves. and I think from quarter two, I think from memory, we're forecasting about an 800k deficit. So we'll be using that £500,000 to cover that, plus some money from your strategic priorities reserve as well. Your 527,000 that you're seeing here is this current year's forecast surplus.
So that's only a
things.
forecast anyway.
Yeah, and we're forecasting a deficit of 800k, I think from memory, but I will just double check that. I'm pretty sure it was an 800k deficit.
It was the budget. It was the budgeted surplus.
And the
Not the
latest
forecast.
Q2 had about an 800k
Oh, I see. So it's
deficit.
not an actual figure then.
So
Right, okay.
we'll need to wait until this summer's outturn to know
Yeah, well,
the
I just
correct
thought
figures.
with the 1.4 we had in the 2021-22, there would have been a bit more brought forward, but clearly that was, if you've got the deficits coming, yeah, I can see. All right. I can see where we are on that one. The other point, if I have another one, on the reduced reserve going down from 1.2 to 1 million, you've kept that reserve at 1 million. Did you then continue to keep the extra 200,000 as the grants? Or did you reduce the grants? Because originally the 200k went into the grant in the previous year.
Yes, please. I
Thank
think
you.
it's been spent, hasn't it? No?
I think, yeah, so we put that into the earmarked reserve and that has been used on community grants, so that was a one-off, yeah. No, that was just a one-off funding, yeah, that got spent.
Councillor Melanie Barrett.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to make a request on how the budget is presented to councillors. And I think there's time to do that this year because it's quite a simple addition. This is prompted by this year's significant increase in staff costs, the whopping 1.9 million. But it's an idea I've been brewing on for a while. So what I'd really like you to consider is if staff costs could be shown as a percentage of staff costs as a percentage of council income. So you can see it's quite a simple addition, and perhaps also as a percentage of overall expenditure. So those two elements. And then I believe that will allow an informed analysis year on year for councillors to see whether this figure goes up or down or stays static, as you might expect.
So your question is asking us if we can do that.
Yes.
I think we'll probably have to take it away and think about that. But Melissa, I don't know if you've got an immediate answer.
Just for clarity, really, I just wondered if chart 4 on page 21 gives you what you need. I know we haven't got the percentage in there of employees as a cost, but it's showing as the green chunk, so that's chart 4 on page 21, shows our employee costs as a whole against the expenditure, or whether you wanted some more.
I think it's absolute clarity. So you can just look at that figure straight away and identify whether it's consistent with last year, the year before. Because it would depend which figure for expenditure you use, and I know, talking to Catherine Steele in previous years, that figure, that you could arrive at that figure in different ways. So for the consistency, I think it's safer if we as councillors are presented with it as a percentage. And this also does get over the fact that you might have contracted in or out staff in any year. So just looking at staff figures is not an indicator in itself. You've got to look at it relative to the overall income.
I think that you've hit the nail on the head there. The problem is that we have had contracted out staff in the past, like Public Realm, which have now come in. So if you compared one year with another, the increase would seem very significant because of the bringing the staff in-house. I guess it's a possibility. I think would hopefully, if we don't change any of our structure in terms of outsourcing or having in-house this year, we ought to be able to do it.
Sorry, Councillor Barrett, just looking at this, the chart that has been referred to, chart 4, does show the employee costs against the total expenditure, and obviously you can see that the 11.6 million is just over 50% of the 22.7 million. So that's it in terms of the employee proportion of expenditure costs, but against income, do you mean just income, or do you mean income and funding together? Because our income from various fees and service income is just 10.2 million, as you'll see in chart 5.
I think you probably need to refer to what other councils do, because I think other councils do this, and you need to follow that so that for comparative purposes it's a meaningful comparison if compared to other councils.
Okay, well, we'll take it on board and have a look, but I think the information that's presented here is quite clear as it stands. But we'll take another look and see if anything more can be done.
Thank you.
The problem is, John, it's only 1 year.
Yeah.
It doesn't show us with...
No. Okay.
Comparison.
Are there any other questions? Just before I go back to Councillor Osborne, from this, no other questions from other members? Okay, Councillor Osborne, is this a question or are you heading to debate now?
It's just to come back on that, if I may. There is just a couple of points I'd like to make in regards to, if we do go down that avenue, in regards to homelessness. A lot of that is prevention. So how do you demonstrate that in terms of revenue when you've prevented homelessness? But also, if we go down that route and we do show it differently, can we also show those posts then that are funded by central government and not just by Babergh District Council? Because I think that's also very important. There's a lot of posts in housing that are government funded, so do not reflect in this figure at all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah. Okay, right. So, members of the Cabinet, we've had questions. We'll now move into debate. Does anyone wish to contribute anything to the debate on this budget paper? Councillor Osborne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will come in before anybody else does. I think when we first sat down to start to look at the budget, it was a really scary position that we saw ourselves in. And we looked at it and we were thinking, gosh, are we going to actually have to cut services? We've come up with a fantastic budget, I think, that enables us to not cut back on services, which is really important to our residents and our communities. So to the officers, I'm thankful for that, and to Councillor Busby, who's put in a lot of time as well. So I'm glad we've come up with this budget. I think, though, however, we mustn't be complacent, because we keep performing miracles, really, as far as our budget's concerned, and we can't keep doing that. So we really need to start thinking on our feet for next year where we're going to go to make sure that we continue with a balanced budget without cutting back services, because that is critical. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Osborne. Obviously, this year we've seen, as Councillor Busby has said earlier, a 19% increase in our total net cost of service, despite the savings that we've looked for and been able to make. There's still that gap between the pressures and savings, which are described in the paper here. And yes, Melissa and the team have done brilliantly, but we also must remember that we have been compensated by government to a significant amount on business rates. I know that other government funding hasn't been that great, but the business rates income that we're getting, funding that we're getting is significant, and we can't always guarantee that year on year. And without that, and I think that's about 800,000, isn't it, Melissa? Something like that. So that's a huge amount, and if we were to lose that in future years, then clearly we're going to have significant problems. And it's like everything. We've got to, every year we've got to really think about this and think about, particularly on fees and income, how we can generate more money ourselves, because we can't rely on funding, we can't rely on government grants, we can't rely on business rates, and we certainly can't rely on council tax, because we are very limited, as Councillor Busby said, in terms of what we can do. 2.99% is the maximum we can do. And we're in a period where we've got inflation of in excess of 10%. So we've got to look to, in addition to making savings, we've got to look to find income from other sources, whether it's investment income or on non-discretionary, on discretionary services, non-statutory services that we provide to residents. Anyway, that's my comment. Does anyone else wish to have any further contributions today? Councillor McCraw.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, this has been it's been referred to already by the Cabinet member, the most difficult budget process we've ever done, but it's also been the most informed budget process that I can ever recall, because at every stage we've looked at the various scenarios, we've had a clear direction from corporate resources and the team, and I do echo the comments of congratulations to them, that we've actually been able to tell how we're pulling this together and how the money can be found and what the rest of it. And I don't like the scoffing from across the chamber. It's not necessary. Yeah, okay, fine.
Councillor Barrett, please, no comment.
This is debate. This is. Yes, it's a good. Well, yes, in that case, could you do so politely, Councillor Barrett?
Councillor Barrett, please, will you be quiet or I'll have to suspend the meeting.
I think you'll have to suspend the meeting because I'm not prepared to listen to this rubbish. So do you want to suspend the meeting?
Yes, please.
Or do you want to stop him talking
Suspend the
rubbish?
meeting. Right. To those watching on YouTube, sorry about that suspension, but there was a little bit of bother and I had to ask Councillor Barrett to leave the meeting for disruptive behaviour. We will now continue. Members of the Cabinet, does anyone else wish to comment? Councillor McCraw.
I hadn't actually completed what I was saying when I was
That's
interrupted
true. You were interrupted.
by the councillor that you asked to leave the meeting, Councillor Simon Barrett. I think it's important to point out the accuracy there. So, regardless of those statements, we prepared and we have been informed and we have gone through a difficult budget process. And I've referred earlier in my question to the potential deficits we might face in the future. The one thing I've taken from this budget process, and the one thing I find really encouraging, given that we're dealing with a cost of living crisis, where everybody is very aware of inflation rates, of how much this is costing, how much that is costing. Some things have an effective inflation rate of 16%. We've recently had a 10.1% inflation rate. The government hope it'll drop to about 5% in the next few months. But the point I'm making here is that the proposed increase that we can recommend to Council, and why I'm happy to second this motion, is still at the same level it has been for the last 3 or 4 years. It's about 3%, 2.99 to be precise, and it's about £5.30 a year. A year, £5.30, 10 pence a week. That's pretty much the level we've had. I think recent years we've been doing £5 a year. I think that 30p a year difference is not dramatic. And of course, at a rate of 2.99%, it's nowhere near any likely inflation rate for some time to come. And I think that's actually quite an important point, where everything else is costing more. We are actually going to be costing relatively less compared to inflation. The net proportion of total council tax that Babergh District Council take, if you like. We collect it, but we don't get it. The majority goes to the county council. A large portion goes to the police and crime commissioner. A tiny bit goes to the parish and town councils. Our percentage has dropped in the time I've been on this council from 10% and maybe a little over to 9%. We're actually taking less of the total council tax. And because we collect it, everybody sort of points in our direction. I mean, I know the shared revenues partnership deal with the realities of this situation, but we've actually reduced our costs and kept services, as Councillor Osborne pointed out. So I think we can commend this budget to the council and ask them for a positive vote on the basis that this is the most responsible way of handling the general fund finances. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McCraw. That's very good. I agree with all of that. Does anyone else? Councillor McLaren.
Thank you, Chair. As this is the first time I've sat in this discussion as a Cabinet member, I just want to say thank you to Melissa and her team because actually I found it useful, I understood it, which for me is probably a hurdle, but I just want to thank you for all the hard work you've put into that report. It was excellent and I found it very informative. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Arthey.
Yeah, firstly I'd just like to say that I quite liked Councillor Busby's short introduction because it was much shorter than we normally get for budget presentations, and I think there's no need for it to be any longer because we've been working on these figures for 3 or 4 months now, so none of them come as any surprise. I quite liked what he said about the way that government funds local authorities as well. I can remember some years back, shortly after the introduction of council tax, and Forest Heath did particularly well in Suffolk, and it was because the way that government funding was distributed happened to go in their favour. He mentioned the situation with Mid-Suffolk and the situation that we find ourselves in whilst we share staff and services. Their position is much stronger than ours. I can only hope that in the years to come, at some point, the formula is rejigged so that we end up being the ones that are perhaps given a little bit more grant than others. It's just the way that it skews, and unfortunately it hasn't gone our way for quite a while. Other than that, I was going to agree with, well, I was going to say it, but then Councillor McCraw said it, about our take of the overall council tax bill. I think that's quite important in a way, because even this year our increase is lower than the increase of the county council and lower than the increase of the police and crime commissioner. So our percentage of that take is continuing to reduce. So although everybody knows that we collect it, the amount of it that we actually get to keep is reducing as a proportion of the overall council tax bill year on year. So we are less demanding than we were in a way. That's it.
Thank you, Councillor Arthey. Councillor McCraw.
I'd just like to point to a contrast that the increase proposed for the Police and Crime Commissioner this year will be £15 a year, nearly 3 times the size of ours.
And you've got to remember that with that £5.30 increase per annum for us, will be up to £182.64 for an average Band E property, which still works out at only £3.51 a week. Pretty good for what we do.
Yeah, let's just put some reality onto this. It's still I think it's one of the highest in Suffolk, unfortunately.
But it's
still good value.
And it's in the lower, the 4th quartile still, I think, across the 3rd quartile across the country. It's certainly, when you look at all district and borough councils,
it's very difficult doing comparisons.
Yeah, it is.
I think we've got to just be very careful. We need to look at doing things differently in the 12 months coming forward. Otherwise, we are not going to be able to achieve the same kind of service delivery that we are at the moment. You can't keep having your costs go up by in excess of 10% and your income by only 3%. the figures do not work out, as we've seen with the HRA, which we'll come on to in a minute.
Right, okay. Councillor McLaren, what further comment?
Just a comment about the illustration that I think Melissa put out at the parish liaison meeting with the pound.
Pound coin,
the pound coin. I think that was really helpful, and I think we should adopt it to share with our parishes.
Yeah.
I thought it was really helpful to understand the split of the council tax. Thank you, Chair.
I agree, thanks. If there are no further comments, then we can move to the vote. But before that, I do want to reiterate our thanks to Melissa and her team. Her first budget as Section 151 officer. So thank you very much. We'll now move to the vote.
Chairman, I think you should have given the Cabinet Member for Finance the opportunity to thank his team.
Okay.
Everybody else has jumped in ahead of him. He should really have had the last word.
Okay, you have the last
Thank
word,
his
Councillor
team.
Busby.
I can't understand why everybody's thanking him. It was me that did all the work. Goodness sake. I was keeping my powder dry.
Okay. Until the council meeting. We'll move to the vote. Okay?
Thank you, Chair. That vote is now in progress. That is 7 votes for, and that's unanimous.
Thank you. Moving on then, item 9, paper BCA 2240, the Housing Revenue Account 2023 to 24 budget. I'll now invite the Cabinet Member for Finance, Assets and Investments to introduce the report. Councillor Busby.
Thank you. So the Housing Revenue Account. Following a period of 5 years that saw annual 1% rent reductions, which ended in March 2020, the councils were allowed to increase rents by the maximum of the Consumer Price Index plus 1% for a period of 5 years from April 2020. So that means we're still in that 5-year period. This has begun to mitigate the impact of the 1% reduction on the 30-year plan. However, the cost of living crisis has resulted in the government making a change to this rent settlement. This is a significant risk to the HRA, as the recent reductions and now the rent cap leaves the council at risk of not being able to meet its legal obligations. This is against the backdrop of ageing stock, which requires urgent investment. The latest forecast predicted an adverse variance of £825,000 against the budgeted surplus of 511. The key factors in this position are the additional costs being incurred to address the backlog in void and responsive repairs, as well as increasing material costs due to inflation. The council's total cost of service has increased by 3.67 million, or 50%, whilst income has increased by 1.5 million, or just 8%. When setting the budget for the forthcoming year, the council must have regard to the level of reserves needed to provide enough resources to finance estimated future expenditure, plus any appropriate allowances that should be made for contingencies. Reserves only provide one-off funding, so the council should avoid using reserves to meet regular recurring financial commitments. So it is against this backdrop that I move the recommendations. We know that any increase in rents will be burdensome, particularly now, but unfortunately we are left with no choice. I ask for a seconder. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Busby. May I have a seconder? Councillor McLaren. Okay, members of the Cabinet, any questions? Councillor McLaren?
Thank you, Chair. Given the backdrop that you just talked about, Councillor Busby, and the cost of living crisis, how, as a council, are we going to respond to the anxiety of, say, the people in sheltered housing? And will that increase the resource, by that I mean people, in responding to those anxieties?
Yes, it won't help. But the situation, the increases that we're talking about are significantly less than the increases that are being felt in the private sector.
Can I respond? Yeah. No, I understand that. What I'm thinking about is that given the reductions you've had over the previous years, of course, the public don't actually save for that. They don't realise that's happening, do they? So they're not ready for these increases. And I'm just wondering the resources needed to cope with people ringing and will that have any, do we have a sort of an increase in resources required to manage that? Because I think a lot of people will be anxious.
Is that right, Mr. Chairman? Yeah. Yeah, it will in some respects require additional resources. We're already recruiting financial inclusion officers to help. But that's not just the only reason. The increase in rent will not result in us having to recruit officers. It's the whole programme of us supporting our tenants through any crisis, cost of living crisis, and also it helps us prevent homelessness as well. We've got a proactive programme of working with our tenants, recognising when they're likely to get into rent arrears or if they're already in rent arrears and helping them out of it. So in answer to your question, we've already got that programme of work with or without a rent increase. We will need additional officers and already recruiting to that. Some of them will be, as I alluded to earlier, they will be government funded, but some of them will have to come out of our own resources. But in regards to managing their expectations and their anxiety, we recently approved a fantastic engagement policy, which other councils are taking on to use. It's an exemplar example of a good engagement policy, and we will be out there talking to our tenants. I know the Director of Housing has already had discussions with the tenant panel about these proposed increases, and they understand. They've had it explained to them. They understand what it's all about, and actually they're in agreement that we need to do it. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Councillor.
Any other questions? Councillor Arthey.
Yeah, it's a question about the discussions that we've had over the last 3 or 4 months whilst we've been putting all of this together. And I thought that we were going to get some data on the private rented sector and the increase in rents in the private rented sector for comparison purposes. I think at the time we were looking at headlines in the paper that said that the private rented sector was looking at 10% or more increases in some areas. And I believe somebody said we will go away and get some data on that for comparison purposes. I just wondered if that happened.
Councillor Osborne, do you have the answer? Yeah, I thought you would.
I've got some. I don't know if it will be sufficient to answer Councillor Arthey's question. But yeah, the average in the east of England, privately rented, is £875 per month. There's a range of 715 to 1,150. We are above the national average, which is £800 per month. In comparison, if you compare that to affordable rent, with the increase, it will be £625.53 per month on affordable rent, and on social rent, it will go from £422.77 to £452. So if you compare £452.37 as an average across the board against a private landlord average of £875, you're getting value for money. There's no doubt about it.
Chairman, that wasn't actually the only increase that I was, the only comparison that I was looking at. It's also the increase in the private sector as a percentage, because we're talking about a percentage increase, and as I understood it, if the headlines in the papers are to be believed, the private rented sector in some areas, the increases over the last 12 months for the granting of new tenancies has been over 10%, and that's the data I thought we were going to try and get. I'm kind of looking at Melissa, but she's not looking at me. So, because I think it was Melissa who said we will get that data.
Apologies if I did that. I will discuss with Deborah and see what we can come back to you on.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Chairman, can I come in on that? Mr. Chairman, can I?
Sorry, yes, you can, sorry.
Okay. Yeah, I think, you did raise this, and you were concerned that with the market rent going up, the formula for affordable housing will also be going up. But what we do is it's calculated by a formula set at 80% of the market rent, or capped at the local housing allowance, and that's what we're basing ours on, the local housing allowance. So does that answer your question? I don't know if Deborah's got any more on that one.
So for private rented accommodation, in the 12 months to December 2022, it rose by 4.2%.
Can I come back? That's not for new tenancies though, because I think what was in the papers was it was not to do with the increase that existing tenants were seeing in the private sector. It was the granting of new tenancies in the private sector, quite simply on a supply and demand basis, because there were none available. And I think that's what the articles in the press were about, and that was the granting of new tenancies, where they were looking at an uplift of 10% over the previous tenancy when somebody moved out.
So I can forward a chart on that, which can be included in the minutes if that helps.
Yeah, okay. I mean, sorry, Chairman. The reason for this is because, I mean, we're looking at a high increase this year, and it's a high percentage figure. I know that there have been years in the past where we've actually reduced the council housing rents, but that's history, and people are now staring at a significant increase in their rent. I also think it's easy to say, oh, well, which it says in the report, you know, there are lots of people who are on benefits, and so therefore it won't affect them the same. But there are also people in our houses that aren't on benefits, that are suffering at the moment, paying their bills, and a large increase is not welcome. So I think it's kind of our duty to explain that things are not easy out there. So, you know, we've got all of the issues, as I think Councillor Busby said, I think, with financing the improvement in our stock, increasing our stock as well, which is another one of our ambitions. But I think it's also useful to actually explain what things are like out in the market. So, yes, there's a significant increase coming, but, you know, just be aware of the fact that out there in the market, things are not rosy either. And the private sector is looking at, you know, new tenancies being over 10% higher than they were 12 months ago.
Yeah, that's just before I go to Deborah, that's true, and I think having that information in the minutes would be very helpful, just to set it all in the context of what's going on in the private sector. And also we know that the private sector are facing huge increases in costs for retrofitting, which some of them are finding almost impossible to bear. But Deborah, if you had anything further?
Thank you, and also just to give some context, so the council took on approximately £80 million debt with the refinancing settlement, and at the time it was the understanding of all local authorities that there would be a rent settlement which would enable us to update our properties and keep our properties in a good standard of repair. Of course, that hasn't happened, and we've had a significant rent decrease over the last few years, and you know, we're here discussing today that, you know, the rent increase, which isn't going up again with the rate of inflation, although, you know, times are really hard out there for our tenants. We also have to think about that we have a responsibility to provide housing which is safe and warm and dry, and we've got a real challenge you know, over the next 30 years, because we need to pump a substantial amount of capital into our properties just to keep them up to a reasonable standard. And, you know, as I've said, that's a real challenge. And if we don't increase the rents, I'm just not sure how I'm going to sit and
present to members that we're able to do that going forward.
Thank you, Deborah. Councillor Arthur, is that the end of your question? Okay. Next question. Any other questions? Councillor McCraw.
It's really more of an observation arising out of Councillor Arthur's observation. It's also true that this is a developing situation because a lot of private rental market properties are about to come towards the end of a mortgage period, which they're now going to have to go out and look for the mortgage they can get. Those mortgage rates have yet to come down. In fact, they're at the highest level they've been for very many years. And for those people who have got the same thing, where they have to renew their mortgage at the end of the 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 year period, it's going to be a huge increase that will be passed on to the private renters. And so whatever figure we arrive at now is not going to be the figure that will actually apply. It will almost certainly be a great deal higher, and I would have said 10% is probably underestimating the sort of levels that some private landlords may need to apply.
Thank you for that. If there are no other questions, Councillor Osborne. It's not a question. I just want to finish off questions first. I'll go to other members and I'll come back.
It's just to come back on that question. I think what Councillor Arthur and other councillors have said here today, I think demonstrates the challenges, the huge challenges that the housing team have got ahead of them over the next few months, over the year and beyond. And just to set it as an example, if we didn't increase the rent, the shortfall would be, I think it is, in no increase, by a reduction in income by year 30 would be nearly 58,500. So, which is a huge amount to lose on that in regards to the delivery of services. And as the housing Director of Housing has already alluded to, we've got so many things that we need to do. We want to be able to do it all, but we won't, definitely without the increase. And I think it's fair to say that our tenants do appreciate, they do understand where we're coming from, and that was shown by the conversations that Deborah has had with the tenants panel. But that's no excuse. We can still get out there as councillors. We can do it in our district councillors' report at our parish and town meetings. We can talk to our residents. We can get out there, walk on the streets and talk to them if we, get them to help them to understand the situation as well. But we mustn't underestimate their intelligence. They know where we're coming from. They know why we've got to do it. But yeah, there will be anxieties out there, and we need to meet those challenges. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Osborne. Councillor Hinton, do you have any questions?
Just a quick one to say that I hope that the forthcoming decisions list CAB 2393, strategic review of garage sites in Babergh District Council, is going to happen in March, because it's a little bit ambiguous when you look at 4.22, and it talks about we're currently receiving around 40 inquiries per month. Garages can be hard to let in some areas. Well, there's a balancing act to be done there somewhere to make sure that we're getting garages let to people who are going to bring in some income, because the amount that comes into the council is quite considerable from non-housing, non-dwelling income. It's going up from 183 to 238,000, 55,000 increase. So there's a potential for some more there. If we can't earn it from garages, perhaps we should be turning them into houses. Because I know there are a lot of garages out there where they are leasehold sites with rather decrepit asbestos-based garages sitting on them, which the people who hold the lease can't afford to remove because of all the regulations on asbestos, etc. And so they're just gradually deteriorating into eyesores. And perhaps we've got to sort of come up with some sort of compromise there.
Councillor Hinton, you're preaching to convert. I think all of us would agree with that. So, but Deborah, you wanted to come back on that.
Thank you. We are aware that there is work to do on garages, especially letting them, and we have we're hoping to recruit to a new post in April, and we've got a new process, so members will see a significant increase in our income from garages. And when we've carried out that exercise, we will then understand where our difficult to let garages are, and then we can start the process of understanding whether there is any mileage in developing on those sites.
Thank you, Deborah. I'm now moving back to the Cabinet for debate. So I've got three hands. Councillor Marvisi, Busby and then Osborne. I think we're in that order.
I was going to just add to the...
Oh, okay. No, okay, quickly, if you wanted to just say something out and then...
Yeah, also there has been a lot of work over the last couple of years actually looking at garage sites for potential development. And strangely enough, they set up a traffic light system. There will be a report coming. I don't know if it will be in this administration now. It will most probably be after the elections. But there is a report coming forward. I think out of all the sites that we've looked at, I think there was about a total of 3 that had potential for development. And that was it. Mainly due to the mixed tenure that you've got on a lot of these sites. It would be impossible to pull some down when you've got some that are owner-occupier. So yeah, there has been an extensive piece of work on that, but it's interesting to see that about 3 sites get the green light for future development. But just to reassure you, there has been a great deal of work going in on the lettings of it, as Deborah's alluded to, but also on the potential development of those sites as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Osborne. Oh, Councillor Busby, go on, yeah.
Yeah, look, every year we talk about reusing garages and building on them. Let's draw a line under it. It probably isn't going to happen anytime soon. We can't. As Jan said, there's so few. Babergh have looked at this, obviously, because we're targeted with building houses. We've looked at this as an obvious source of land to do it. The problem is it's not just mixed tenure, it's also the fact that most of these sites where there are the garages to rent, there are parking problems. So if we build more houses, it will create even more parking problems. We'd probably be better off turning them into car parks. You know, it seems like an obvious win, but I don't think it's going to generate anything big soon.
It doesn't have to be houses. They could be redeveloped into garages that could be let at a reasonable rent rather than the £1 a year or whatever it is that they're paying leasehold at the moment to effectively contribute to an eyesore.
Okay, well, thanks for that. We'll move on from garages now, I think. Councillor Marvisi, did you have...
I wanted to ask a question, Mr.
Oh, okay.
Chairman.
Okay, go on, yeah, go ahead.
What concerns me is that these garages are, by definition, old. And we're trying to look at how to improve them. And if they are old, and somebody mentioned asbestos, then surely we as a council have a duty of care to ensure that any asbestos in any of those buildings is removed. Because if the buildings deteriorate, the asbestos will deteriorate and the people will suffer. That's all.
Fair point. And I think our work on asbestos will continue and as and when it's identified like that. Councillor McCraw.
It's only a point of information. It's just that people tend to treat all asbestos as though it is equal, and it is definitely not equal. The fundamental form of asbestos found in every farm in the country is chrysotile, what is called grey asbestos, and it's a fibrous compound where asbestos fibres in a very small percentage are bonded with cement. It forms a needle-like fibre, which is not the sort that causes mesothelioma. That would be the insulation types of asbestos, like blue and white. Those are the dangerous ones because they have a hook-shaped fibre. So we must be careful. The actual problem of chrysotile is if you actually break it up, you actually create a problem where none needs to exist. Because the one thing with chrysotile is you don't take power tools to it, rotary grinders or anything like that. So in the science side of things, not all asbestos is equal, but unfortunately the law treats it as so, and in fact I have to say in this instance the law was poorly framed.
Thank you.
We should not panic, is what I'm trying to say. All that curvy roofing, chrysotile.
Yes.
Every farm in the country.
Yeah. Okay, right. We are into debate. Does anyone else wish to make any comment about the HRA that doesn't involve garages or parking? If Councillor Busby.
Yeah, I think just to emphasise what Deb's saying about the costs going forward. Look, we know we've got a hell of a lot of work to do to bring our houses up to date, and this is not just to bring them to a current standard. Standards are changing all the time. We've got to improve the energy efficiency of the housing. Where does the money come from that? Well, it has to come from rental income, etc. The problem we face, and what I tried to get across in my introduction, was that the government chop and change the rules on a regular basis, but having made the rules, they then don't stick to them. Now, we're supposed to be in the middle of a 5-year agreement where the rentals increase by consumer price index plus 1%. This is to recoup the 5 years where they were reduced. Well, they've changed that because they didn't like the outcome of that. They've changed it. How on earth can you plan a multi-million-pound operation, which is what it is, when the ground rules keep changing? We've got to get a better way of doing it. Or the government have got to get a better way of doing it.
Councillor Osborne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a good HRA budget, there's no doubt about it, and there's a lot of work gone into it, and thank you those officers for put that work into it. However, as I said about the general budget, the same applies to the HRA, the Housing Revenue Account budget. There's huge challenges ahead, and whatever the government do or don't do, we've got to make sure we're ahead of the game, and that we've got an HRA budget that enables us to deliver what our residents want, within reason, of course, but also to be able to make sure that we're compliant, to make sure that we're reaching that EPC standard C at least. I think we've got between A and C, we've got 68% of our stock already reached that. But then the other stock that we've got, you've got these 60, 70 homes that were built in the 60s or 70s that need huge investment into them. And so there's some real challenges ahead for officers to make sure that we continue to deliver on the HRA account. But at the moment, it's a good budget, but there are challenges ahead for officers. But thank you very much. I don't mean to steal your thunder, Councillor Busby, but it is my housing team, so I do want to thank them and the finance officers for the brilliant work they've put into to get where we have with this HRA. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Osborne. Anything else from anyone? Anything else? Right. Then I think we move to the vote. Can we conduct the vote, please?
Thank you, Chair. The vote is now in progress. Thank you, Chair. That is 7 votes for. That's unanimous.
Thank you. Next item, item 10, paper BCA 2241, business rates relief policies. And again, I'll now invite the Cabinet Member for Finance, Assets and Investments to introduce this report. Councillor Busby.
You can see who does all the work, can't you? I mean, anybody else like to thank my team before I start the introduction?
I'd like to thank you for putting up with you.
Yeah. Well, for my third and final report today, business rates. The government recently announced 2 new relief policies as part of the autumn statement. They are a business rates, retail, hospitality and leisure relief scheme, and they love their snappy titles, don't they, which will increase the level of relief to those covered by the policy from the current level of 50% to 75% for the year 23-24. This is up to a maximum of £110,000 per business, not per outlet. And a new supporting small business relief scheme which will cap business rate increases to £600 per year from the start of 23-24 year for those businesses that are losing eligibility or seeing reductions in small business rate relief or rural rate relief. We will use our discretionary relief powers to apply these savings, and the government will then fully compensate us for the total amount of revenue lost through making these grants. So these reliefs cost us nothing. But obviously our local business ratepayers and the local economy will benefit. These reliefs need to be applied to bills that are going out in early March, hence the urgency to approve today these schemes. These discretionary policies are based on the criteria outlined in the government guidance, but if members have any questions, I'm pleased to delegate answering them to Andrew Wilcock, the SRP Operations Manager. I'm relieved to move the recommendations set out in section 3 and would ask for a seconder. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Busby. Councillor Osborne, you second? Yes. Right. Any questions, members of the Cabinet? Councillor McCraw first, and then Councillor Arthey.
I have a strong suspicion that Mr. Andrew is expecting this question because I want to clarify something. So, as I understand it, the businesses that are eligible for the RHL scheme, retail, hospitality and leisure, have a rateable value. That rateable value normally has a multiplier. The multiplier is often 0.5, 50%, and I'm assuming that that is still in place. Is it correct then that a business in this sector that currently has that multiplier of 0.5, therefore 50%, will be automatically increased to 0.75, thus paying half the previous business rate or non-domestic rate? Could I have confirmation of that?
Andrew, do you have an answer to that?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The multiplier's been frozen, but we will automatically raise the relief to the 75% and bill everybody accordingly.
So the net effect would be that this business rate would effectively halve in that instance. Thank you.
Councillor Arthey.
Yeah, my question is about village halls, and I asked it before, and I don't think there was a full answer. Village halls have historically benefited from, I think, 90% relief, but they've had to pay the 10. Does this affect village halls in any way, and if it does it mean that they don't have to pay that remaining 10%, or that remaining 10% is a lower figure?
Yes, it affects village halls. They will be entitled to the relief, so in effect will reduce what they have to pay. So in effect, where they've got the 10%, we will cover that with the retail relief.
Can I ask another one?
Yes.
Will that automatically be applied because we know who they are, because we know what they've been benefiting from in the past, or will it be by application?
So those that are currently receiving the release, it will automatically be applied, and there's just under 500, and obviously we'll do publicity to pick up any new cases. And I think village halls have currently got the 50% relief, so on the retail side.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor McLaren.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I'm just going to show my ignorance about, I don't know if I'm going to say it properly, hereditaments. I have to confess, Chair, I had to go to the dictionary to find out what actually that meant. So read it with interest when I found out what it meant. But what I didn't understand was the charity shop bit in that. Because according to the dictionary, that's any property that may pass to an heir. What I didn't understand was why the charity shops were in there.
Thank you, Chair. So hereditaments is the rating terminology for me and you on street. We would call it properties. Yeah, it does include any building that charity shops are in. So we will grant relief in that aspect.
So really it's about who owns the property that the charity shop probably is renting from. Is that the link? Or?
Yeah, they will have a lease, but I mean hereditaments is just really the term that is used to identify what you and I would call a property.
Okay,
so,
thank
yeah.
you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
So it's slightly different from your dictionary definition, perhaps. Yeah. Okay. If there are no further questions from the Cabinet, Councillor Hinton, any questions from you?
Yes, just a quick, just a quick question. In the past, public toilets have been liable for business rates. What about car parks and public toilets? Are they come under the small business part, or I don't suppose they come under the hospitality side? But,
Pardon the pun, but there is a government relief for public toilets, which came in a few years ago, so those that we have will receive that relief. Car parks are rated, so a charge is due. It wouldn't come under retail hospitality. They are excluded from that.
So presumably then they won't qualify for this 100% one because they're already getting a relief from a different source. The toilets, sorry.
Okay. Right.
We've got to pay.
Yeah. Moving back, we're into debate. Does anyone wish to contribute to the debate on this paper? Any comments anyone wishes to make? In which case then, we're all happy to go straight to the vote. Can we open the vote, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The vote is now in progress. That is 7 votes for. That is unanimous.
The last item, item 11.
Can I just, before we move on to the last item, could I just
Go ahead.
thank my team for the sterling work they've put in, the dream team, the 3 of them sitting there. Was it see no evil? Anyway, thank you, team. It's been brilliant.
Thank you, Councillor Busby. Moving on to the last item then. Paper BCA 2242, consultation of a revised table of fares for Hackney carriages. I'd now like to invite the Cabinet Member for Environment to introduce the report. Councillor Malvisi.
Thank you, Chair. The paper you have before you was presented to Licensing and Regulatory, and they have agreed, approved it. So after consulting with the trade, it was agreed to amend the Hackney tariff by moving from yards to miles and 1/10 of a mile. It was also agreed that tariff 4 would show as an extra because of the size of vehicles used, the time of day these vehicles are used, and the usage over 365 days. I ask Cabinet to approve the recommendation at 3.1. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Malvisi. May I have a seconder, please? Seconder? Councillor Arthey. Any questions from members of the Cabinet? Councillor McCraw.
Are there separate votes to be taken on 3.2, 3 and 4?
Can I answer, Chair?
Yes, go ahead, Councillor Malvisi.
3.1 is in 3 sections, but those 3 sections form 3.1. So you're voting for 3.1. But we have offered you 3.2. The recommendation from licensing is to go for 3.1.
I'm not quite certain as to this, as whether 3.1, 3.2, 3.3. I mean, are these an either or not?
McCraw, we're trying to sort this out. Thanks for pointing it out.
I think it's important to get this sorted.
Yeah.
I mean, surely we've already done 3.3, and 3.4 is a reason for the decision, so presumably it's one or the other? I think it's 3.1, 3.2, but I'm not quite certain as to whether we have just 3.1.
Well, no, 3.1 changes the tariff.
Right.
It moves you from tariff 1 to
Right, I see. 3.2 is actually a different recommendation.
Yes.
Thank
It
you.
is, yes.
That's
You-
fine. And I
3.1
can
is
now
the-
see the clarity of it. Yes.
And the preferred one, 3.2, just lists the various options, but it says that option 2, the increase of the first mile in each 1/10 is the preferred. So we're, excuse me, a single vote for 3.1 plus 3.2 option 2. Can I...
Well, no, because 3.1 option 1 offers you miles and 1/10 of a mile replacing yards.
Yes.
3.12 is moving tariff 1, reverting to tariff 2, which is a plus 50%, and it's also related to the time of day. And then you've got 3.13, which is using tariff 4 as an extra tariff due to the size of the vehicle, time of day, and its usage over 365 days. So that's for the larger vehicle.
It doesn't seem as 3.2 is compatible with 3.1.
Can I see... Kate, can you clarify this for us, please?
Yes, thank you. Yes, so if for clarity, option 2 of the tariff is what the Hackney Carriage Trade preferred, and that is at 4.8 of the report. In relation to the recommendations, the recommendation is for committee to consider opting for option 2, which is what the Hackney Carriage Association agreed on.
So, for clarity, what is paragraph 3.1 in the report then?
So apologies, Neil Gardner isn't here, the author of the report, but just to clarify, that was the first option for committee at the Licensing and Regulatory Committee. It's actually 3.1 that is the option that we're looking at.
I think the important thing is whether the recommendation that we approve, because we're making the decision, whether it is consistent with the Licensing and Regulatory Committee's view, and it is, isn't it?
That's correct, yes. The Licensing and Regulatory Committee recommended option 2 for the committee to consider.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
So we only have a recommendation 3.1?
I'm still uncertain as to
I'm
still uncertain as to what purpose option 3.2 serves.
Sorry, if I could...
Mark,
if I could try and
please,
clarify, Chair. Yes, 3.2 was capturing the fact that it had been to the Licensing and Regulatory Committee, but I don't believe that should have really been there as a recommendation. It should have been there for note. 3.1, option 2 within 3.1 is the preference from committee, but also 3.11 and 3.13 are additional. They aren't part of the option, but they're two different recommendations that are coming forward, that not relating to the tariff choice that was chosen. So 3.11 is regularising miles and 1/10 of a mile replacing yards, and 3.13 is that tariff 4 is shown as an extra due to the size of vehicles, time of day, usage over 365 days of the year. So they're two additional notes. It's 3.12 that is the recommendation of the Licensing and Regulatory Committee that they would like you to accept.
And that includes the increase the first mile plus tenths?
It does, yes.
Right.
Well, fundamentally, Chair, 3.2 as a recommendation appears completely redundant and possibly shouldn't have been included in the report.
Correct, yes.
And I don't
that's
think,
what's confusing.
I have to say, given the difficulties we've had with the Hackney fairs and licensing in general, that's really unfortunate. But I think it's absolutely essential we make it clear that it's unnecessary for us to vote on.
We're voting on 3.1. So, yeah.
I think it needs to be there so the Cabinet can see.
Yes, absolutely. But it's for information.
But
it's for information. It's not a recommendation.
And would be its best place would be in the body of the report rather than the recommendation section. Yeah. I agree with. Okay, so we're all clear on that now. Questions? Any questions apart from? Okay, Councillor Hinton, do you have a question?
Just a quick one, Mr. Chairman. I know you probably feel the same as representing a ward that's butted up to that iron curtain called the Essex-Suffolk border. But why have we got Breckland, Kings Lynn, Norwich, and all the rest of it in rates in this chart, and nothing from Colchester, which is, let's face it, on our doorstep, on tendering, which are on our doorstep? What are their rates? Are they higher than ours, lower than ours? What?
I must admit, that's interesting, yeah. It would be very useful to have some comparisons with our immediate neighbours as well as further afield. But if there's any explanation for that, okay?
Yes, there is. There is a chart out of 350 councils. The Private Hire Monthly is a body that registers where we sit within other council areas. We are placed, if this is to be approved, we will be placed at 154 out of 350. And East Suffolk is 13th of how much they charge, so they're quite a lot higher. West Suffolk is 121, Ipswich is 218, so we would be placed in, yes, essentially.
But do we know what Colchester or Braintree or tendering?
If you bear with me, I can just...
Thank you, thanks.
Mr. Chairman, if you in my village, if you order a taxi, it comes from Manningtree, which is
yes.
tendering's rates.
Yeah. That would be very helpful, actually, just for comparison. While Kate's looking for that, does anyone else have any further questions? We'll move into debate in a minute then.
Sorry, so Colchester is 158, so we would be above Colchester. We would charge more than Colchester currently do.
What about do you have tendering?
The other point to make is just that looking these rates up live like this is obviously prior to any of those authorities making their changes, which they might be making in their budget books. But I think it's absolutely fair comment that we could include other neighbouring authorities in our benchmarking when we take this forward next time that we do this. Obviously the trade's been consulted on this, so they're supportive of this change as well.
Thanks, Mark.
Tendering, if you were to approve this, we would be above tendering.
Right. Thank you very much. Thank you. We'll now move into debate. Mark's made a very useful point, a reminder, and it's one that I wanted to pick up on. It does seem that this does have the overwhelming support of the trade, and I know we've had issues in the past with getting trade buy-in to changes like this, but I think this time we've got that from the trade, so that gives us confidence that what we've got in front of us is right and will be acceptable. Any comments from anyone else? No? Well, in which case then we can move to the vote.
Thank you, Chair. That vote is now in progress, and we are only voting for recommendation 3.1. Thank you, Chair. That is 7 votes for, and that is unanimous.
Close of the meeting. Thank you very much, everyone. Our next meeting, Monday, 6th of March at 2 p.m. Thank you.